To hand over to Mark to give us a thought-provoking presentation from his perspective. I'm going to unshare my screen, Mark. I'm guessing you've got probably something to share.
Thanks, mate. Hopefully, you've set the stage nicely for me there. No pressure whatsoever. I'm just trying to share my screen now. We'll see how we go.
Yeah, it's coming up. There we go. I can see it.
Got that?
Yep, perfect.
Magic. Okay. So quickly just to introduce myself. So my name's Mark Wallace. I'm actually the head of cybersecurity and more recently architecture and the project portfolio at Fortescue Metal Group. So I managed to collect a few different things recently. And I've been there for a couple of years now. Nearly 3 years now. And what I really wanted to do today was just talk you through some examples and some learnings I've had recently of reworking Fortescue cybersecurity strategy. So when I started about 2.5 years ago, we literally had a team of one person in security that was buried in the network team, despite having a significant technology footprint. So we've been on a bit of a journey for the last 2.5 years to uplift our capability to be appropriate for the risks that we face. And we've come to the end of that strategic planning period, if you like. So for the last 3 months or so, we've been developing our next cybersecurity strategy, and it'd be fair to say that reflecting on where I thought we would be when I started at this point in time and what we would have achieved, and the way we're looking at the strategy for the next 3 years is actually a little bit different than I probably would have expected. And I think there's just a few interesting learnings and challenges, and that was really the focus of the conversation today. So I'll fly past the forward-looking statements just to put them in there for fun. I'm being recorded, aren't I? That's going really well, Mark. So really quick overview about Fortescue. Basically, Fortescue is a West Australian iron ore mining company. We have the largest heavy autonomous fleet, commercial heavy autonomous fleet in the world. Roughly 180, I think, haul trucks that we've got now. Probably about 20 different drill rigs that are fully autonomous. A number of light vehicles now that are autonomous, running around the sites doing parts delivery and various other bits and pieces within the portfolio. Roughly, I think we've got about 14,000 employees and contractors working in the business at the moment, which is more or less doubled in the last 2 years, which has been quite a challenge. We'll be opening a fourth and fifth iron ore mine at the end of this year and into next year in Western Australia. And we have sites around the world as well. So we've got trading offices in Singapore, in China, and quite big exploration offices in Colombia and Ecuador and Argentina and a few other places. So it's quite a big profile from a cybersecurity point of view to manage and to deal with. And just to give you an idea of some of the metrics around that, the trucks that we've got have roughly got 250 sensors on each of them, IoT type sensors, and they generate around about 91 billion events every month that we have to store and manage and translate into something useful from an analytics point of view. We've got hundreds of terabytes of mine models and all kinds of other bits and pieces floating around. So it's quite a big technology footprint that we have to secure. Now, what I really wanted to talk about was a bit around that strategy journey that we've been through and some of the challenges that we've faced. So we came to the end of our strategic period, as I mentioned, and we've really just started to get the next 3 year strategy in place. And some of the things that have kind of changed, well, the risk hasn't really changed that much. I don't know whether everyone's across what the World Economic Forum puts out each year, but this is one of my favorite reports that comes out. So it's a global survey of businesses that the World Economic Forum does. And they print out this beautiful 200-page State of the Union address type risk report, but it always has a very good way of laying out those macro type risks. And it'd be fair to say all the time I've been at Fortescue, cybersecurity's been in the top 10 each time, and that hasn't really changed. What is, I suppose, changing is they are moving further up into that top right-hand corner. A few years ago, we were still talking about mass migration of people and all kinds of other things, and the cybersecurity ones are down the bottom end of the top 10. Well, they've been moving upwards over the last couple of years. So the one thing that has changed from a security point of view is the risk has actually escalated. So the cyber risk has actually increased. And there's various other stats that kind of say that cyber crimes increased by 50% or 60% in the last couple of years, depending on what you read. But it is a big trend that's heading upwards. So the risk profile that we have to manage is pretty impressive. And it'd be fair to say that our strategy has been to invest to meet that particular challenge. However, there's a few things that are a little bit different, I suppose, or that influence the way we've looked at our strategy. So, reflecting on it, if you'd asked me 3 years ago, and what those over the horizon type things are that I thought we'd be looking at this year, I would be looking at orchestration and facial recognition and all these quite fancy things I thought would be part of the daily way we operate and function. And we'd really have all of the groundwork in place, and we'd be looking at all of these funky over-the-horizon security type techniques. Now, the reality is that it's actually quite different. Whilst the risk has increased, the attack trends haven't actually changed that much at all. So what you can kind of see here in front of you is just a bit of a view of what are the attack trends that we need to worry about and that we've kind of considered looking forwards. And the reality is that you can see a little red dot there in the middle. There is some amazingly clever new crazy malware out there that is probably very sophisticated. But at the end of the day, not much has really changed in the last 3 years. The attack vectors are pretty much the same. We still can't configure things properly. We're still running around looking at all these old systems or systems we didn't know we have, or misconfigured systems that we haven't been able to configure properly because we can't get any downtime to fix them. A lot of the things that we actually still need to deal with our cybersecurity strategy is the same old stuff, which surprised me. I thought, and it's really influences the way that we've actually had to think about what our strategy is going to look like. That the reality is we're still focused on the basics. We actually still need to get better at the basics, and it was one of our objectives 3 years ago was to have those hygiene factors in place and the real foundational capabilities. And I'm happy to say that it's actually one of our objectives again for the next 3 years is actually to continue to focus on the basics, because the reality is that we really still haven't achieved them. And a lot of the ways people are still getting compromised is actually by not getting those basics right. So, which I found that was quite interesting compared to where I thought we would be. We still need to get those strong foundational capabilities in place, no matter what. One of the other challenges that's really kind of confronted us is the big IoT thing. I think Rob mentioned that in his intro before as well. It really has gotten quite difficult to work out where the edge of the organization is. The security perimeters just disappeared on us completely. We don't know what an endpoint is anymore. Everything seems to be connected to the network, and it's completely blurred the lines of what we have defined as the security assets that we need to be protecting. There's a proliferation of devices everywhere. Again, depending on what stats you subscribe to, hypothetically, there might be 29 billion devices, I think McKinsey was trying to tell me, by 2022. That there's 127 new IoT devices every second that's being connected to the internet. And so there's this huge horde of new devices on our network, and we're no different. We've got nearly 1 million IoT sensors on our fixed plant. I mentioned there's 250 just on each truck, and we're rolling them out faster than I can keep up at the moment. So there really is a new attack surface. That's quite a big challenge that's forcing us to think very differently than we would have in the past. And it also challenges the old tool sets that we've got in place. So, the traditional ways of looking at endpoints is kind of going by the wayside a little bit. And it is pushing the limits of what we've got. And it's forcing us to think about security in more of an adaptive way and a behavioral way that can be far more flexible and responsive, and not be about trying to install something on every endpoint or using signatures and those types of things. So it really has pushed the boundaries of our strategy as well as of our organization. I don't know whether anybody heard about the casino a couple of years, just to give you a bit of an example. I think I might have used this example before, so I apologize to anybody that's heard it. But just some of the challenges with the IoT. There's a casino in the US that was actually hacked a couple of years ago, and they had one of those giant, I wouldn't call it ceremonial, but ornate fish tanks in the foyer that filled up the entire foyer wall. And this fish tank happened to be remotely managed by a third party. So they had some IoT sensors in there to make sure the water temperature's right and the chlorine levels are right and all those bits and pieces. So they could do that remotely. And this particular casino actually lost their entire high roller database after getting hacked through their fish tank. So it kind of just gives you a bit of an idea of the risk that comes with plugging in all these extra devices on your network if you don't have that adaptive, flexible way of actually responding to it. So we need to get the basics right, like I said before, but now we need to be able to do that really quickly at scale, and that is quite a challenge in of its own. The last one that I was going to talk about, and this is a real learning for me, I think, as well, as something we've had to change our posture with quite a bit, is tool bloat. So and you can see my not continuing the fish theme. Sorry about that. There's a puffer fish on there that's looking a little bit bloated. We, as I mentioned, we a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago, we actually got some money to invest in a ton of tools. And since then, my team keeps coming back to me with the next cool thing, and we put the next cool thing in, and we've got quite a big suite of tools across our environment. But what that's actually ended up doing is we've got overlap everywhere. All these different tools expand the features that they provide, and they can do things beyond what you probably originally thought they could do. And what we've ended up with is a suite of tools where there's 6 different tools that can actually perform the same control objective at the end of the day. But we haven't put any thought into which one of them are we going to rely on to deliver that particular outcome or control objective. So right now, we just have them all doing the same thing. We've got all of the alerts and the noise and the dashboards and everything that comes off of those particular tools. And what does that do? Well, that causes a lot of alert fatigue. And as you can see here, alert fatigue leads to distraction, and distraction always leads to disaster. So where we're at is we have tools that are kind of giving us a measure of comfort that, yep, we've got everything covered. But at the end of the day, it's actually blinding us from what actually really matters. We've got sucked into putting too many things in place, not actually getting enough value out of a smaller set of tools, and the resultant dependency on looking at lots of dashboards and having lots of alerts to correlate is actually blinding us. So really, one of the big takeaways we had was we actually need to kill the noise. We have way too much noise coming off of all of the different tool sets that we've got. When you add that to the users, the stakeholders, the external incidents, the intelligence sources that we subscribe to, we really are almost numb with too much information. So what part of our strategy for next year and the coming years is to actually try and overcome some of this noise and to refocus our efforts on what's actually really important. Because then you can see some of the things we've got listed on the right there. It's really slowing us down from detecting things. We're not responding necessarily very well because we're starting to investigate something, and that investigation becomes quite fragmented as you jump between tool sets. One of them gives you a false positive, one of them doesn't. we get very confused into terms of what we're actually doing, and we end up with what is really low fidelity information. And whether or not we can actually prove that we've got our benefits and our ROI out of those tools is pretty questionable with a few of them. So there is a real focus now that we're putting on reviewing, and this is kind of relevant to the vendor discussion. Every quarter sitting down and reviewing, what is our plan for that particular vendor and product? Is it still delivering the value we're expecting? What does their roadmap look like? Does that fit in with our roadmap? And really trying to pare some of these tool sets back so we can get rid of some of this noise and focus on the things that are actually important again. So the real theme out of this whole thing is actually, and just kind of highlighting some of the key points, is actually coming back to basics. And that's kind of the roundabout journey we've actually gone on with the strategy. As I mentioned, 2.5 years ago, we had basics and cyber hygiene as a real key component of our strategy. And we're basically got exactly the same concept built into the next 3-year strategy. Now, there's a slightly different lens on it, that we do have a lot of the fundamentals in place, but by the changing threat landscape with the IoT explosion, and coupling that with our overinvestment in tools and trying to do a bit too much, we actually need to get back to basics in a slightly different way, and that was quite an interesting learning. But just a few things I'll just leave with you here, just when you're thinking about your cybersecurity strategy that really stood out for me as being most important. Our crown jewels had moved a mile, so make sure you do go back through your crown jewels on a regular basis, and we really had to work through that process again. As I mentioned, getting the basics right, but making sure you do that at scale. There's no point, doing the basics really well for basic endpoints, servers and what have you, when IoT is redefining what the perimeter looks like. It needs to be adaptive and flexible, so you can see adaptive protections on the end there. Building the muscle memory within the team, so the exercising, the incident response type stuff, the actually getting those patterns of behavior embedded in the group. Whilst we have great processes and great tools, we still don't have the muscle memory that I would like to see, so that when it does hit the fan and the pressure's on, it just is as old habit. And once you kind of get to that point, you can start to automate things. From the tool set point of view, go through them and clean them up. Work out what that baseline set of tools actually is, and have a process throughout the year to revisit those investments and whether those tools are overlapping and the roadmaps meet your needs. And the last one, we can't do this alone. So one thing I've found that's really critical with the cyber strategy is, as an organisation, Fortescue doesn't have enough resources standing on its own to protect us. We need to partner with others in the industry through things like the Mining and Metals ISAC. We need to work through different threat intelligence sources, whether it's with the government. We have energy assets, so we partner with some of the energy intelligence bodies. But having that ecosystem is important to make your strategy work. You certainly can't do it on your own. And that was it. Hopefully I was close to 20 minutes.
Awesome, and you were right on point in terms of being thought-provoking. So well done. Definitely like the fish and other. We do have, and I had heard that story, but it's always a good story. So thank you for reminding us on that story of the fish tank. We do have a couple of questions. I think Andres is asking, would you distinguish between targeted and non-targeted threats and attacks?
Would I distinguish between them? In terms of planning, I'd say that we do consider it. So I'm thinking of the example of Maersk, for example, with the collateral damage. So Russia was targeting the Ukraine with the NotPetya outbreak or malware attack.
That's exactly where I'm coming from, right? I mean,
where is it?
Was a clearly non-targeted attack and created big damage, right? But there are other attacks which are targeted directly to your company, trying to get your assets, right? And you might treat that slightly differently, possibly.
In the planning from a threat point of view, so when we look at our threat actors and that risk assessment piece, We certainly look at the threat actors that we think want to pursue us directly, but I've got a very heightened, I can't think of the word, it's very much in focus, that collateral damage now, in particular since they've also had issues, I think, with Lloyd's of London and getting any kind of insurance payout, because it's technically an act of war, because it was Russia attacking the Ukraine. So all of their cyber insurance is worthless. And I don't know where that case has got to, but it's certainly something that we've kept front of mind.
Excellent. We've also got another one from Clifford. What are you doing to educate your workforce? We all know that people are often the proverbial weak link.
Yeah, so I have a full-time cyber culture person that runs our awareness training and education program, and that has a 3-year roadmap behind it as well. So we have an online training platform which is run by Proofpoint, used to be called Wombat, and basically make it mandatory for all new starters to do passphrase training, because we have a passphrase policy, as well as some phishing training. That's kind of the bare minimum. And then there's this targeted privacy training for high-risk different cohorts that we have. Beyond that, we have a phishing simulation attacks that we do on a regular basis, and if you fail 2 phishing simulation exercises in a row, you get auto-enrolled back into the online phishing training and then have to go and do that again. And then personally, I actually do a lot of one-on-one type sessions with different groups. So they get me out there to talk to them about what we're doing. The CEO is very, very supportive. So things like, and it's come up a lot with COVID recently with remote working, we've had a real platform to keep that cyber message going. So we work with the comms team very closely to get things up on the TV screens around the organisation, to have articles on the intranet. So it is a multifaceted program that we run, and I agree with you completely. The technology bit's a lot easier than the people bit. The people bits kills me.
Excellent. Okay, another one from Shane. Great presentation. How do you typically test, review, and refine your
Gosh, that's an interesting one. We review it on an annual cycle, I suppose, would be the first thing. So it's a living and breathing document. We certainly don't get it right, and I keep reminding my team that want to argue about wording of certain things that, unless it's materially wrong, don't be too precious about it, because it is a living and breathing document. We need to adjust each year as we go. We redo the maturity assessment against NIST and ASD 8 on an annual cycle to see how we're tracking, as well as we refresh. There's a risk. There's a risk assessment at the front of the strategy of what we're focusing in our time on, that maps back to those initiatives. So as part of redoing that risk assessment on an annual basis, it also then dribbles down to those initiatives. So that's how we kind of review and improve the strategy, if you like. And then the other part is we have a proper assurance program in place. So the pen testing and the phishing exercises, the incident response exercises. We've got a ransomware simulation in a couple of weeks that we're going to do. So those types of things just help to prove up whether we're doing the right thing or not.
Excellent. I've got a question from Brad. Have you started to look at compliance for IoT endpoints against standards, such as the IEC 62443, to make sure that they are more resistant to fish tank attacks?
To fish tank attacks. We don't use the word compliance at Fortescue. I'll just say first. The answer is we're actually, I think this is an area we're probably a little bit behind on at the moment. So that the business has run off and done a ton of things, and we're playing catch up. So we have a working group internally of all the different business stakeholders to come up with our own standards based on the international standards for how we want to approach IoT. We're playing with some monitoring type things in terms of non-repudiation of those sensors, making sure the the sensors that are on our network are who they say they are. They're actually been identified and authenticated. So we are playing with some of those things, but I think we certainly have a long way to go, a little bit behind in this particular area for sure.
Excellent. And then another question from Spencer. Keen to hear your views on where you strike the balance between housing cyber capability and passing off some off to partners/vendors.
Yeah, so look, I've got a fairly small team relative to the number of staff we've got. So our strategy really is to maintain some core capabilities that are normally customer facing, in particular, and then those specialized skills we typically will go out to augment the team with. But I try to retain, in particular, the customer facing skills in the team. I try to retain those internally as much as possible, but we certainly have a hybrid model where we outsource a lot of the specialized things, but it is in a strategic kind of way. And looking, given budgets and what have you that we've got, I mean, for example, we have a hybrid approach with our managed security services providers with the SIEM and SOC type things. So that's all outsourced rather than trying to build our own team internally. It doesn't really make sense to do something like that. So we try to make the best value decisions as we possibly can.
Excellent. I think that's all the questions I've got in the chat.